Well, I want to add something to my recording as sea people, so I'm doing this as a sort of backup note. The bits of history or historicity that we do have, and in a sense there are all sorts of clues laying around, is that they were troubled at the time, the nations of the Eastern Mediterranean in particular, from people of not really an unknown origin. They could identify certain coastal kingdoms and towns, especially in, is it called southern, well, what we think of as Turkey's southern Anatolia, the coast there. There was a couple of places, was it Lucca and another one further west, that were plaguing the Hittites towards the latter part of this troubled history. And, well, that's, southern Anatolia, the Hittite king, what was the Hittite kingdom? Yeah, that's right. It's plaguing the coast of, is it called the Levant? That sort of area north of the Holy Land, as I think of it today. Today it's Palestine and Israel and that part of the world. To the north there. The drift of evidence seems to be that, yes, these people are a mixture from possibly even the Western Mediterranean, because they had the sort of shipping that, reminds us of the capability of being a traveller on the coast, and the ability to travel across the Mediterranean. Of course, they're used to it as traders. But significantly, though, it's... Can you imagine people in the Black Sea having great trouble and having to migrate, and they migrate by sea, of course, because that's their strength and their transport system. And they go through the Bosphorus, is it called, into the Aegean Sea and settle and invade and work their way round the coast in any weakness they can find in what was then the Hittite kingdom. And it does seem to be majorly that the Hittite kingdom seems to fall. True, because of trouble from the east as well. It's the Assyrians and so on, is it? But then we have that sort of notion that Egypt is, apart from what was to become Persia itself, increasingly dominating its own region, the Assyrians and so on. But Egypt, and Egypt claim some considerable successes in battles against the sea people, but clearly had to put up with the sea people occupying the coastal delta of the Nile for far too long. So my overall view at present is that the sea people were essentially a displaced Black Sea naval people, if you like. And joined with any other seafaring vagrants and pirates and so on, partly almost because of the way nation states use them as mercenaries and so on, and mercenary navies in a way. And of course they were occupying themselves as such according to their perceived gain, self-interest. One minute they could be fighting in your army, the next minute they could be fighting against you. And we may well sort of think of them not as particularly well ruled, centrally ruled, because it's a society that's fleeing from its origins because of some sort of natural disaster like sea level rise or land level falling, or even some other disaster, but that seems a likely scenario to explain things. You always have many enemies, of course, not just one or two, and it's when they combine together to make an assault upon you that you're really in trouble. And I'm guessing, but it looks as though that's what often the problem was in the Eastern Mediterranean, that the various groups originating from not just the Black Sea, but possibly the Western Mediterranean too, that start to gain in, if you like, naval, a bit of an overstating word to say naval, but shipping technology, and not only that, but I've got a feeling that the development of iron comes from the western end of the Mediterranean too. In other words, they may have a technological advance that's starting to count, and certainly as regards their boats, that seems to be a key thing. You know, Egypt and Assyria weren't strong on navies to begin with, you know. I mean, they weren't looking to, their needs weren't in the Mediterranean, their needs were in their own countries. In the case of Assyria, of course, it had to spread towards the Mediterranean to even start to be, to see it as a necessary part of its military prowess. When we see the Persians fighting the Greeks, of course, that's a case of naval strategy, and I think the Greeks, well, of course, the Greeks made a mess of them in an amazingly short period of time under Alexander. Great from Greece's point of view, but not from the conquered nations' point of view, at least not their hierarchies. Although I think we can see that Greece overall was an incredible step forward in terms of civilized culture as we understand it, but that's partly because we're the ancestors of a sort of Greek view. We're genetically biased in a cultural sense. I don't mean that we are of Greek physical genealogy particularly, but, you know, culturally we've been very affected by the Greeks, haven't we? But that, of course, is much more nearer the present. I mean, the Greek sort of time of philosophers and so on that we're talking about is anything from 600 odd BC to 400. Yeah. Look, these things of history, I get hooked on them because I just think it's fascinating. I wonder if we can see what the cause of some change was in the story of history, the historicity. But it's not really relevant to your life abundant and life eternal, is it? Whether we get the right explanations or not, I mean, it's trivial compared to focusing and mastering understanding truly, and entering into our true relationship with God. In that sense, I see the Jesus historicity as miraculous, that taking God as our heavenly dad, recognizing or holding such a view, has an absolutely miraculous impact upon our happiness and our well-being, and I think our prosperity and assurance and joy, hope, and all the things that we value. So we should, I'm arguing, have some priority, some great priority, to prioritize God, in fact, namely to love God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength. Should, from the point of view of not some imposed law, but some foundational principle of life and abundance and eternal. That to view God in this way, which is achieved universally and simply for all life, to simply cultivate gratitude by a habit of seeking out, focusing on, noticing, meditating upon all that's good and lovely, that your appreciation grows, and a practice with it of thanking God for such loveliness, which we have not earned, have we? Not really. We just find, we inherit, or we've been given, or we've been nurtured by our parents and culture and society. But really, that's just the show of the hidden hand of God, our heavenly dad that loves us. And to take that view seems to be cardinal, foundational, everything. So, quite simply, whatsoever is good and lovely, think on these things, and be in the habit of practicing the thankfulness to God for it. And your gratitude will be overwhelming, and you'll have no problem in keeping this first commandment, as it's called, this first principle of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength, and experiencing the blessings that follow accordingly, which are with an infinite God, infinite blessings. And as an aside, I would say, from my, of course, limited experience of practicing Merlin Carruthers, basically thanking God in all circumstances, but actually for all circumstances, as an act of trust. Well, practice it and see. Practice with little difficulties. Thank you for this difficult person. Thank you for this boring moment. Thank you for this rain. Thank you for missing the bus. And just see if you don't get a whole string of little miracles and blessings. And then practice it with the bigger difficulties. Until when you're assailed by some major difficulty in life, which, well, so much of life does have to cope with. I'm not saying you will have to cope with, but if you do, you're well trained and well able to just say, thank you, God, for this loss, this fear, this concern. I trust you for it. And every time it nags at you, you say, no, I thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad. You see, you control the mind. And perhaps it is the case that it is God's amazing control of the mind, his mind, that has brought about the whole of creation and our very being. And if we are to be children of God, we too will have this amazing ability of God to perfectly control the mind and all it is. This is, as I understand it, our birthright as children of God, that we become wonderful like him, and that this is not some breach of humility, but the realization of the wonderfulness of our Dad. So we love you, Dad, and thank you, Dad, for all that you always do. Love you, Dad. Thank you, Dad.